I've told Fiona like a million times there is no way in the world that she can die before me, because I honestly, Gary, this is going to sound pathetic. I don't even know how to get into our bank account. If you told me to do online banking, you might as well say to me, you might as well tell me to go and do a lecture in Swahili. I can't do it.
Hi, I'm Gabby Logan and this is the II Family Money Show. In each episode, I speak to a familiar face about the role money has played in their family life and professional success. In this episode, I'm joined by Alastair Campbell, the author and political strategist best known for his 6-year stint as the former Prime Minister Tony Blair's Director of Communications. Despite returning briefly as an advisor to Gordon Brown and to Ed Miliband, Alastair left frontline politics in 2003 to focus on his partner Fiona and their 3 children, as well as writing and raising awareness about mental health issues and drawing on his own personal experiences to help others. In our interview, Alastair opens up about his lifelong fear of financial insecurity, why he hands over his family's financial reins to his wife, and he thinks former Chancellor Gordon Brown does the same, plus how he made a fortune busking around Europe with his bagpipes. So much to get into. I'm not sure we're going to have the time to do everything, but this is essentially about money and finance, this podcast. And actually it's interesting how talking to people about their lives through that prism reveals quite a lot about them and their motivations. Let's go back to your family life as a kid and how important money was or wasn't. What kind of a role money played? Were you aware of your parents having any struggles? Did you feel that money was abundant? What was it like?
It's really interesting. And I was thinking about this before we started. I was thinking, me and money is kind of, I don't know what to say really, because my childhood, I wasn't aware of it, really. My dad was a vet. I'd say my first sort of financial memory is of him sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday night, and I'd say, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going through the accounts for the week." And I didn't really know what that meant, but I can remember his checkbooks. He had these checkbooks out and his bills. And I can remember he did used to complain a lot about vets in Yorkshire not paying the bills on time. But I never had I never had a sense of us being worried about money, whereas I knew I had friends at school who did. And I can remember sometimes when we used to go on holiday, all our holidays were in Scotland. A bit like you with Wales, we were always, Scottish, and Scotland was kind of where we went all the time. And I do remember I remember my dad came from a croft. His father was a crofter in the Hebrides, and I do remember having conversations about how they saw him as, now he's a vet, he must be absolutely rolling in it and blah blah blah, and they'd had to struggle and stay on the island and all this stuff. But I think the other thing I'd say is I don't ever have a memory of my parents being money conscious, thinking that money was a big deal.
Because what I find interesting in these conversations is people who aren't aware of their parents' finances or struggles. They often choose careers themselves that aren't motivated by that kind of financial security. They just tend to do things that they really love. And inevitably, because they're on this podcast, they become successful at it because they've got a passion for it. So when you were sitting down thinking about where you wanted to go in life, was money ever a factor for you?
I don't think I ever had that I want to be rich thing. But I did always have worries about money. For example, my first real kind of earning, apart from sort of odd jobs when I was at school and stuff. But when I was a student, I became a busker with my bagpipes. And it was just an accident. I was doing language at university. I had a year abroad. I actually went without my bagpipes. But then when I got there, I remember my dad and my mum were coming out just to see me. I think it was the first time they'd been abroad. Well, first time they'd had, I can't remember, one of them had to get a passport, remember that. And they came out to see me, and I said to my dad, as you're driving down, bring my bagpipes, okay? Now, after they left, I went to this little village. I was in Nice, right? And I went to this little village called Ayres, where they make all the perfume. And I found this really quiet car park away from everybody. There were no cars. It was in the middle of winter. And I just sort of, I blew the pipes up, I tuned them, I gave them a bit of go, and I was just playing a few tunes. And within about half an hour, I had a crowd around me, and they were throwing money into the box, cash, coins. well, this is interesting. I honestly hadn't gone out with a view to busking. And then I thought, well, if it's like this in an empty car park in a tiny little village, what's it like in the pedestrian precinct in Nice, right? So I went down the next day to the pedestrian precinct in Nice, and honestly, I was rolling in it. So, and then I travelled all around Europe. I travelled all around Europe with the pipes, and I was never broke. Honestly, I made a lot of money, all in cash. And then,
I mean, there can't have been too many people competing for the bagpiping kind of post or stand in the busking community. You must have been the only one, right?
Oh no! Through my life, I've met loads of buskers who play the pipes, but definitely down there.
Yeah, but I mean, in the south of France, they can't.
No, I met one. There was one other, and I like to think I was a better player than him. But you're right. The great thing about the bagpipes is that you drown out the others. The singers, the guitars, they got no chance. And you know, down in the south of France, those terraces of restaurants, right? I had a mate who had a motorbike, and I used to get on the back of the motorbike, playing the pipes. We'd arrive from distance, right? We'd go up and down the terrace at about 100 miles an hour, doing wheelies and playing the bagpipes, right? People would laugh, etc. We'd stop, he would take off his crash helmet and go round and collect the money, back on the bike and off. So we could do about 10 restaurants in 2 minutes. If you're a guitarist or a
you were absolutely raking it in.
Yeah, we were absolutely raking it. We actually set ourselves the target one day, starting in Brussels and finishing, I can't remember where, Strasbourg or somewhere. And we set ourselves the target of doing £1,000 equivalent in one day. This was in 1977. And we just fell short, but we weren't far off it here. And the other thing about bagpipes, you'd be driving on the motorbike, going through a little town, and you suddenly see there's a sort of heaving bar. You just start playing, and then you just walk in, and we never ever got stopped, ever.
What age were you, Alastair, at this point?
20.
Right. So you went back to university with a lot of cash.
I can't deny that I spent a lot of cash while I was away. But yeah, I had cash, and I went back and I put it.
Right.
You'll like this. Your investment type people will like this. I put it all into a building society account. And what's more,
did you?
I did. And Fiona will tell you, when we first met, and for a long time thereafter, I never went anywhere without my building society passbook in my inside pocket. And here's the thing: I've got. I
remember those little books. Those little.
With the handwritten, every time you went in, you gave it to the woman or the guy behind the counter. They had to count the cash, write it in. So you had this. I've got it somewhere. You've got this handwritten record. And I had this thing. I don't know where it came from. I had a pathological fear of being in debt. And my building society passbook was a reminder that I always had cash somewhere. Okay. And it was, I was well into...
So where did that come from? Where did that fear?
I've still got it, by the way. I don't know, really. Maybe at a subconscious level... I remember my dad, when I was about 9 or 10, and because he had his own practice up in Yorkshire, and he had this really bad accident with a sow, this sow that attacked him while he was vaccinating the piglets, and he was in hospital for a long time, and then he came back and he couldn't quite get going again with the whole 24/7 practice thing, so he sold the practice. And he joined the Ministry of Agriculture for a kind of quieter life vet's job, as it were. And we got moved to Leicester. And I often think that was like, just, when I now have sessions with my psychiatrist about my depression, that's the one big moment of trauma that I can find in my childhood. Now, it didn't necessarily feel like that at the time, but I think it was this sense of having less security. And the other thing is, I was conscious of the fact, at least I think I was, this might just be memory, or, rationalising it today. I was conscious of the fact that we moved to a much smaller house. And I don't know whether, again, at a subconscious level, I wasn't thinking, this, right, she's had this accident and our whole life has changed and we've had to move in the middle of school term to a place that we don't know, didn't particularly like, to be honest. And we're living in this, listen, it was a really nice house, but it was a much, much, much smaller house. So I don't know where it came from. And I've always liked cash. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I worked on my uncle's farm up in Scotland. And I actually did it because I liked going there and I liked him. But he paid me every week in one Scottish £1 notes, hundreds of them. And again, I would keep these over the summer, and I had this stack of £1 Scottish notes, and part of me was thinking, I can't wait to go to the Building Society and pay this in.
I tell you what, you'd have trouble spending them anywhere. I can't even spend a Scottish tenner in my local high street. They're very suspicious of Scottish currency, aren't they, in England?
They are.
Even now. So going back to that makes sense. That experience makes sense, and why you would have some kind of deep-seated fear of perhaps losing all your money or not being able to afford what you previously had. In terms of the lessons that they gave you, apart from the ones that you're observing, did they ever sit down, your parents, and say, when you get your first job, make sure you take out a pension, or make sure that you put something aside? I mean, you had your building society account, we know that. Did you get any of those kinds of lessons from them?
No, not really. I think both my parents were driven, they were much more driven by what I would call human values than financial values. I remember when I went to university and I had a grant. I went very young. I went literally straight from A-levels. And I remember my dad dropping me off at Cambridge, and he gave me two things. He gave me a tenner, right? He said, get something decent to eat tonight and don't spend it all on drink, right? And he gave me an envelope inside which was this a letter, and then at the end it was that quote from Hamlet that loads of kids have been given when they've left home. This above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day thou canst not be false to any man. And that was it. So no, there was no sort of big sit down. I think also they had worked. I think they knew, because I don't know. I don't think they worried about me when it came to finances, whereas maybe they worried about my siblings a bit more, particularly my older brother who had schizophrenia. And so he was always, once he was diagnosed, that was always going to be quite a struggle for him. Although, funny enough, he ended up, after he was in the army, and then he got invalided out of the army, and then he scratched around trying to get different jobs while he was coming to terms with this wretched, horrible illness. And he ended up thinking that he was a great insurance salesman. And he kept sort of wandering from insurance salesman job to insurance salesman job. And I was always his first customer. And funny enough, the other day, in fact, it was around the time that you got in touch to ask me to do this, we got a letter out of the blue from an insurance company about the maturing of a policy that I honestly didn't know I had. And it was, yeah.
When I hear people have those kind of stories, I always think, how do you not know? But you've probably been sold so many by him over the years.
It was quite a few. And this one was like, his first one was Scottish Amicable, then there was Scottish Provident, and there was Leicester something or other. And then he worked in Leeds, and I was always, he'd say, and he'd tell me, he'd phone me, Ali, I've got a great new job, and I'm doing insurance again. Oh God, here we go. And it's only a tenner a month. Give us a tenner a month, and this will make you this, and it'll make you this. Anyway, this one I can't remember how much it was, but it was in 5 figures, and it came in just out of the blue.
And what did you do with it? That's interesting, kind of how your financial, kind of attitudes changed. Would you go and blow that money because you didn't know it was coming in on something that you really fancy? Or would you put it into another account or ISA or whatever it is that you do now?
You know what? This is, I don't know what you and Kenny are like, but I don't do anything. So Fiona does literally absolutely everything. So basically, I give it to her, and then what happens to it, and I wouldn't have a clue. I'm really not into money in a way. I want.
Is that because you're irresponsible?
No. I'm not a spendthrift. I mean, I'm not tight. I like to think I'm pretty generous, but I'm not a big consumer. I don't see the point of having more than one car. I don't really go now that we've got this house in France. We don't really do kind of holidays other than coming here. I don't have a watch. I've not worn a watch since I got a mobile phone. I think, what is the point of having a watch when your time's on the mobile phone? I'm just not into I'm not a big consumer. I don't spend I don't actually don't like being in shops, is the honest truth. I get a bit kind of edgy in any retail environment. And it's not because I'm going to blow loads of money. It's just that I'm not interested. And so, no, something like that, I would just say to Fiona,
You're obviously a massive football fan, a massive sports fan, a massive football fan. So what would you think of spending a lot of money on a trip to watch Burnley? If Burnley were playing in Europe, right, would you be like, yeah, I don't care what it costs, I'm going to watch them play on Tuesday night, Wednesday night?
Well, when we were in Europe a few years ago, I went to every game. So that was Aberdeen, Istanbul and Athens with one of my boys. And it was whatever, honestly, it didn't matter. Yeah, so that would be me being spendthrift by my lights.
A luxury.
And I would, we'd stay in a nice place and, we'd absolutely.
And so, as far as you're aware, Fiona's doing very sensible things with the family finances.
Well, I'm not sure about that because we recently had some sort of work done, and she was like, "Oh, we've been a bit cleaned out on this," and I'm going like, oh, "Hold on a minute, what does that even mean?" When I, work my balls off and sell loads of books and make loads of speeches that people bizarrely pay me to kind of say what I think about the world. And you're telling me, well, it'll be all right. Once we're through this, it'll be fine. But yeah, I sort of do trust her. What we don't do, the only shares I own, you mentioned Burnley, the only shares I own are in the University College of Football Business, which started at Burnley. And I only bought them because it was starting in Burnley. I didn't buy them as an investment. As it happens, they've done really, really well. So I'm not a share owner. I think we've got an ISA. I think we've got an ISA. And I remember when we took them out, Fiona went low risk and I went high risk, and hers has made way more money than mine. She told me that with glee recently, and she said,
oh really?
She said,
that's interesting.
Stuck with me on the low risk one, and then it would have been fine. And apart from that, I do trust her. Yeah. But it's also because I don't want to think about it.
And so all that work you talk. No, it doesn't interest you enough to really dig deep into it. No. So it's a good job that she is interested enough to go off and sort stuff out. Going back, take a step back a bit to kind of your first working job, if you like, your first career was obviously as a journalist. How motivated were you when you were negotiating your own contracts and things? Were you quite good at pushing a hard bargain and making sure you were paid a decent wage?
Yeah, probably was. In that I've never been, I'm not great at asking for money, but I've never been scared of saying, hold on a minute. For example, I'm just this morning I was talking to this guy in Ireland who's doing asked me to go and speak at a conference, and he told me what he wanted to pay me, and I said, well, that sounds fine, but I don't want to get there and find that you've got 5 other speakers there who are being paid double. Which was a way of saying, am I being paid the most here, right? So he told me, So, and he said, I see what you mean. He said, well, I've got a couple in who are on board. I said, well, who are they? What is it? And by the end of the conversation, I sorted that out, as it were.
You were top dog.
But I didn't I was joint top dog with some guy who I kind of accepted was a topper dogger. As he came from sport.
Okay.
Probably got more.
That won't be the clip we use to advertise the podcast.
No, you don't want to do topper dogger, do you? That is
topper
not.
Dogger.
No. So, but so when I was a journalist, when I started out as a journalist, I think we were on about $3,000 a year. It was something ridiculous as trainees. But then I did find that I was doing loads of freelance stuff because we were down in the West Country, And it wasn't that well covered by the national papers. And there were some really big stories happening when we were down there. The Penley lifeboat disaster. We had a very famous murder case that was happening. That was a big running story. And I found that I was making quite a lot of money on the side just by, working for the paper I was working for and then filing stuff to the nationals. And I found that kind of very easy to do. And then when I've then started to go into national newspapers, what I tended to do was to look around the newsroom and say, who was I on the level with? And then make sure I wasn't being paid less than them. That's kind of how I approached it. But if I suddenly found out that somebody was paid double, it didn't bother me that much.
Because, of course, when you go into government, you are then, I assume, pretty structured in terms of what you can earn, because you're obviously open for scrutiny. So you've left behind the possibility when you're working in that commercial environment of newspapers to earn what you want to earn and, be freelance, do whatever you like, write books, go on telly. And then when you work in government, it's, as we know, the Prime Minister's finding it very hard to survive on his salary. So what was your kind of compromise, if you like, at that point? How hard was it to negotiate a salary in government that you felt was commensurate with your talents and what you were offering?
Well, it didn't really work like that, because what happened was when I started working for Tony Blair in opposition, so I had 3 years being employed by the Labour Party, and that was a big pay cut. And one of the difficulties about doing the job, given that Fiona and the rest of my family didn't want me to do it anyway, to be doing something that most of your family don't want you to be doing, and you're taking a massive pay cut, it wasn't easy, right? And then when we got into government, of course, then I had quite a big pay rise. But as you say, that's your lot, and you're paying tax. And the other thing people don't maybe understand about special advisors, I wasn't a civil servant, I was a special advisor, is that you're not on that civil service pension scheme. In fact, one of the things now is that, we over the years we probably haven't put enough into our pensions. And I meet friends and colleagues. I was at a thing at the French Embassy the other night, and in London, and there were colleagues there that about my age who were senior civil servants, and of course they're now, they're doing perfectly fine, thank you, without doing any work at all, because they've got a very good civil service pension. But I never really worried too much about that. And also, I may say, Gabby, at the risk of dragging this into the political arena, I'm not sure the current government are that bothered by the rules. I think they're making money all over the shop. Even the thing about getting other people to pay for your wallpaper, I'm afraid in our day that just would not have happened. So,
well, that's what I was intimating when I said that Prime Minister doesn't seem to be able to live on his salary. Obviously, there seems to be some grey areas, doesn't there, around what's going on at the moment in terms of what's declared and what's not. Were you quite strict about that? Or did it feel to you that there was a very strict code of conduct that was being adhered to at the time when you were in Tony Blair's government?
Yeah, and also, I am very strict like that. I am when it comes to stuff like, and partly that was the press guy in me, knowing what the media would do with it if they found that people were kind of bending the rules and so forth. Yeah, so I was very, very strict. And that led to all sorts of real difficulties. I mean, when I think about the thing with the flat in number 10 and how Johnson and Carrie Simmons have, this stuff with the wallpaper and the refurbishment and what have you, I can remember when Cherie, Tony's wife, Tony and Cherie got a new bed for the number 11 flat where they were living, right? Now, they paid for it themselves. But I can remember the absolute hoo-ha in papers like the Mail about, they've spent X thousand pounds on a bed, right? It was like, whereas now, I mean, this lot get away with so much. And I'll tell you another thing, Checkers, people talk about all these. I don't know whether Johnson does this, and, I'd be very surprised if he does, but I can remember that Tony and Cherie had to pay themselves for all these dinners that they hosted down there. So the rule, and I, I was certainly keeping across that and saying that, we've just got to be very, very careful about this stuff.
It is a compromise in many ways, obviously, because what the Prime Minister earns, is a lot of money. But of course, compared to what people like that can earn in the private sector, we all know that they could earn a lot more money if they were working in banking or if they were working in less noble arts, let's say. So there is this sense, isn't there? And Tony Blair's gone off and done very nicely after he's been in government. Are you kind of, when you take that pay cut, as kind of yourself obviously could have earned a lot more staying in the kind of commercial sector, that's a moral and a purposeful kind of decision almost that you're making. But then are you thinking, well, later on, I'll get myself back on track. So I'm going to not have a pension right now. I'm not going to contribute as much as I did to my private investments, because later on I'll be working back in that commercial sector.
I don't think I thought like that. It's like when people, one of the big earners in my life has been my diaries. The first deal I did for the first volume of my diaries was book deals aren't as big as they used to be, but it was a lot of money. And so when people were interviewing me about the diaries, when you kept the diary, were you thinking one day you publish them and make loads of money? And the truthful answer is no, I wasn't. I mean, look, part of me, when I was working with Tony Blair, part of me thought, I want to do this job and I want Labour to stay in power forever. Because that's whereby politics are. And
so you would have been doing the job forever if it had gone well.
I think it's impossible to do it forever, but I don't think I was thinking about money in that way. And when I did leave in 2003, I hadn't talked to anybody about leaving apart from very, very, very small number of people. Tony, obviously, Fiona and the kids, obviously. But apart from that, because it was, if you remember the circumstances in which I was leaving at the height of the Iraq War and the Hutton inquiry and all that, and I'd been trying to get out for some time, but I couldn't talk to anybody about it because at the time it would have been like a big story, So I kept it very, very tight. And what it meant was I couldn't sound out potential employers.
Couldn't find a job.
No, so I didn't. I literally left. I had nothing, and I went from this full-on job to thinking, right, what do I do now? And then I had various strokes of luck. One of the first things that happened actually was, I don't know if a guy called Keith Blackmore, who was the sports editor of the Times, and he got in touch and asked me to write a series about.
He employed me.
Did he? Oh, of course, yeah. Well, he asked me to do a series.
Yeah.
He said, look, how do you fancy doing something non-political? I said, well, it depends what it is. He said, well, just think you could write a sports column for us. And I said, well, I don't know if I do about doing a weekly column, but what about if I write a series about who is the greatest sportsman or woman of all time? And I basically go around the world interviewing loads and loads of famous and brilliant sports people about who they think it is. And he said,
what a great job to create for yourself.
Exactly. And then the speaking thing, I remember Al Gore. I think it was Al Gore who said that the post-politics speaking circuit should be classified as white-collar crime, where you get offered ludicrous sums of money to go up and talk, And that, once I realised that was there, and I knew it wouldn't go on forever, although to be fair, I'm doing one in Africa next week, which is, so it can go on forever, but it doesn't go on forever in terms of being satisfying, if you like. But then I got into the books and the consultancy.
No, but I think even though you think you've told those stories or you think you've done those speeches to a lot of people, but actually there's a whole world out there that hasn't. And I think this brings us on nicely actually to your new podcast with Rory Stewart, your most recent podcast, let's say, which has absolutely done amazing business. It's the top of the charts and it's a fantastic listen if anybody hasn't heard it. And you not only kind of disseminate and explain some geopolitical issues that are happening right now, not least of which would be, as we're speaking, what's going on in Ukraine, but then you dip into the kind of archives of your own experiences and tell stories from the front line of politics and the things that we just don't, I don't know whether news coverage just doesn't get time to explain or whether they don't want to explain, but hearing first-hand accounts of how things actually work in practice, which is absolutely fascinating. And so I'm listening to those thinking, well, I thought I knew all these kind of things. I've read your books. I thought I knew stuff. And actually, you reach a new audience all the time. So I think that's why you're still being very much, kind of in demand and employed to speak. And that podcast as well will give you another audience, won't it? The youth who are listening, as I was telling you before, I'm encouraging any teenagers I meet to listen to it.
Oh, good for you. Thank you, Gabby. But this morning, funnily enough, I had an email from a bank asking if I was free at the end of May to do a thing for this bank, and would I be able to bring Roy Stewart along? So you're right, that thing
As
will...
if he's in your pocket.
He's actually in Jordan, but... so, yeah, I do think, well, you know this from your world, you have to, in a sense, keep doing the same things as you've always done, but adapt them to a world that's changing around you. And that's, in a way, that's what makes a freelance life quite interesting. And I would worry if I have a thing it drives Fiona mad, but I don't have any, my diary is on paper. I don't have update it online. It's all on paper. And I have it, if it gets over 4 pages. Yeah, I know, but if it gets over 4 pages, I'm starting to think I'm losing control of the next year or the next 6 months. I like to keep it very, very adaptable. So that if I suddenly do say, I'm going to write a book starting tomorrow, or I'm going to do a TV program, or I'm going to, I don't know what, start a new campaign about something, I can just say, right, I'm going to throw myself into that for the next few weeks. And that's a nice feeling. So
the freelance lifestyle, which is, notoriously precarious and can be, and there is a temptation as a freelancer to always say yes to everything because you never know when it's going to dry up. But you've obviously reached a point where you're so confident in what you do that actually you can create space to do your writing, create space, presumably as well, for your own mental health, because you've realised along that journey that it's not great to be over busy and to fill all the gaps in your life. But there is the side of the freelance world, which that financial kind of insecurity can be a driver, can't it?
Yeah, when I meet people who are freelancers who are basically operating in a world where they want to get to about, 35 grand a year or something, and they're working flat out to do that. That I think that would scare me. So I'm still in that kind of space where, as you know, because we've done stuff together, I will often speak at schools and colleges and charity stuff pro bono. But when it is a bank, I will ask for quite a lot of money. And so if you've got a few of those in the diary going forward, then that's a kind of financial base. Then the other thing, this maybe goes back to the insecurity we talked about earlier. If I look at a given week in the next few months and there is no earning event in that, I get a bit panicky. Now, it's ridiculous, but I do, and I start thinking, right,
a bit antsy.
Yeah, I've got to put something in there. So yeah, I've recently, really, I've never really had that mentality, because when I was a journalist, I was full on salaried. Then, as you say, in politics and government, salaried, not allowed to make money on the side. And I never saw myself as anything other than a kind of full-on salaried person. But now, I've got to be honest, I don't think I could give up the freedom that I've got.
You are an entrepreneur, you're one of Margaret Thatcher's dreams. She wanted everybody to be their own boss, didn't she? I don't think you're going to like that comparison, are you?
No.
Let's talk about somebody in politics that you probably do have a lot more admiration for. Gordon Brown, as Chancellor, obviously had to make big financial decisions every day. When you've got somebody like that who's your colleague, you're seeing them all the time, do you ever kind of ask personal financial issues? What are you going to do with this? Are you planning on raising this? Do I need to move some money to there? Did you ever get any kind of advice or tips from Gordon? No,
never. And again, I think some people in politics probably are doing that, trying to find out what's happening because it affects them. And that kind of thing never, ever crossed my mind. Do you know what? I don't think it crossed Gordon's mind for himself either. If you think about being the Chancellor, you're making decisions that will affect you and your family as well. I thought you were going to ask me whether I ever asked Gordon about how he managed his own financial affairs for himself personally. And I don't know this, but I'd be very surprised if Gordon is anything other than like I am with Fiona.
So Sarah does everything.
I suspect I'd be very surprised if he's too closely focused.
You've talked about asking your kids, and Fiona obviously, but discussing decisions with your family quite regularly actually already today. How did and that they didn't like some of the decisions that you were making. So I get the impression that the Campbell household, growing up, your kids were kind of very involved in what was going on and heard lots of really interesting conversation, I imagine, as well. How much did you talk to them about their own finances when they were kids, and how aware were they of kind of savings and, putting money aside or thinking about the future? Did that ever come up?
No, not really. I think Fiona and I, like our parents, like my parents and Fiona's parents, I think are the same, is that I think we were much more interested in sort of hoping that they were growing up as good people rather than that they were kind of obsessively focused on money. Now, as it happens, our oldest child, Rory, he's a professional gambler, mainly in football, and does pretty well. Got a good company. I think his political values are in the right place, but he's obviously into money, and I think I think understands money much better than I do. Understands the way markets work probably better than I do. And then our second boy, Callum, he's in the film and strategy world. And again, I think quite canny, but not driven by money, just not driven by it. And our daughter, Grace, who you've met, she's a comedian, which is, some of them get very, 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 very rich, but most of them don't. It's a precarious existence, and I think Grace is honest enough to admit that she does okay, but could she have done it without knowing that mum and dad were in the background and would help her out if need be? It's tough. Tough.
Yeah. And does she rely on the bank of mum and dad sometimes? Or does she have to do a supplementary job? Does she have to work somewhere she doesn't really want to?
The very short answer to that is 100% the former. and she's very good at playing the card of, well, you weren't around enough when I was growing up, so you owe me, kind of. But she's pretty good at that one. Yeah, but
she's good at manipulating her dad.
Yeah, I'm pleased in a way though that they've all ended up doing very different things that they want to do, and I do think
they followed their passions, which is
I guess that's right, and I think with Rory and his company, look, these things go down as well as up, that's for sure. But it's sort of, he's in his 30s now, and I sometimes do think, well, this goes back to my insecurity about being insecure. It's really weird. That's what it's about. It's like I fear being financially insecure, and part of me thinks, well, Rory will look after us. He's he's doing well, and he's generous and what have you. So I'll tell you the other massive fear. I don't want to come over like I'm completely useless, but I am a lot of things. But I've told Fiona like a million times there is no way in the world that she can die before me, because I honestly, Gabby, this is going to sound pathetic. I don't even know how to get into our bank account. If you told me to do online banking, you might as well tell me to go and do a lecture in Swahili. I can't do it because I've never done it. So, and things like passwords
she's going to have to write a manual or something. Yes. Passwords. You have to write a Bible for you of passwords.
I keep asking for it and it never comes. I'm not proud of it, but I am utterly.
She just assumes Yeah, but she assumes she's going to live forever, or she's going to outlive you, so you don't need to do it. So you won't know the answer to this question then. I was going to say, did you take kind of the advantages of doing ISAs for your kids and things, which obviously are beneficial from a tax point of view, but you're going to tell me you've got no idea?
None whatsoever. I know that my mum, or was it Fiona's mum, bought them something. But here's a good example, right? And I was really, really pleased about this. When my brother Donald died, he was the one with schizophrenia, and he didn't have much money, but he had this absolute obsession about having enough to leave all of his nieces and nephews something, right? And it was a fixation. It almost came to the point because Donald was a gambler, and I had to bail him out a couple of times with his gambling debts, which was probably why I'm not a gambler. And Rory is a gambler, but he's more successful than Donald ever was. And when he died, and he left them some money, okay. But I'm really chuffed that they used it to commission a portrait of him, which now hangs in Glasgow University, where he was the official piper, and it's at the bottom of the steps as you come out of the graduations. So. And so that I was that kind of thing. So I don't think they're. This when you hear people saying I want to be rich, I want to ask them, well, what are you going to do with it? Why? Rich for the sake of it seems to me just a crazy ambition.
Alastair, we've learnt a lot about your financial kind of education and theories. You're not materially motivated. Your wife pretty much takes care of everything when it comes to any investments or accounts. You're definitely happy that your kids have followed their passions and not pursued careers based on money. You didn't have that kind of very insecure background when it came to money as a kid. You didn't seem to worry too much apart from that one moment, which perhaps has led you to not ever want to be in debt, which is no bad thing. But I wonder, of all the periods, the busker in France, the young journalist with his first salary, doing his work on the side as well, or the man in government, or even the man now who's doing a lot more freelance work, which have you learnt the most about money, would you say? Which period taught you your best lessons?
I think probably the busker. Because I think what it taught me was that you can get out there and just make money. And even though this sounds really weird, we've just been at a wedding in Switzerland. I played the bagpipes. And I know that if I really fell on my uppers, I could go out and play my bagpipes, and there would be some people who would put money in my box.
Thanks for listening. If you've got time, please like and follow the II Family Money Show and leave us a review or rating in your podcast app. You can find loads of ideas on how to plan for you and your family's financial future at ii.co.uk. I'll see you next time.